Hello, my friends. I'm so happy to have you here. As a child life specialist, one of the best parts of working in a hospital are all the amazing clinicians that you get to work alongside and truly see the magic and miracles that they create for families every single day. I'm not putting on rose colored glasses and saying that everything is easy and goes perfect all the time, but there are those certain clinicians who just know their craft so well, and you feel so confident in working with them that you know the family is in such good hands. Well, today I get to introduce you to one of those amazing clinicians. She is a registered dietitian and her name is Hillarie. We got connected online because she was producing content that spoke to so many of the things that I have heard families talk about, especially when their child has a G tube. So many of the normal day to day activities that they don't get to participate in, like going out to eat as a family or being stressed about which formula to buy and which is the best and how do you have access to it. And so Hillarie saw a true need in helping families navigate getting traditional formula or whatever they needed through their G tube into actually giving whole foods in a blenderized diet through the G tube. Hillarie is not one of those salespeople that you come across on Instagram who thinks there's only one way to feed your child. She's the exact opposite. She wants to look at the exact family that she's working with, know how unique their needs are, and see how she can offer insight from her clinical expertise. She has a community for parents, but today we're getting to know Hillarie and why she started this in the first place. She is fresh off new mom life. She has a brand new baby. So the fact that she even joined us for this interview makes you realize how important this mission is to her. And I can't wait to introduce you to her. Let's go ahead and get started. Hey friends, welcome to Child Life On Call. My name is Katie Taylor. I am a mom and I'm a child life specialist. If you're listening to the podcast today for the first time, welcome, and we want you to know that the conversations we have here are designed for parents whose child has received a medical diagnosis. I know it may feel extremely terrifying and world-changing even, but you're here now, and you're about to hear from another parent who has had the same feelings that you do right now, and they're still standing. They had the courage to come here and share what it was like for them, to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you. I'm so grateful to each and every guest and each and every listener who shows up here, and it's my privilege to host this sacred space.
I live in Michigan with my husband and daughter, and she's pretty new. We had her in January, so she's
Wait.
7 weeks.
Postpartum?
Yes, yep.
Oh my God, you're amazing. I cannot believe you just gave birth 7 weeks ago. Not only just like the way you look so professional, but like I know you're dog tired right now. So thank you for doing this.
Oh, no problem. And honestly, I can't complain because she's been a pretty good sleeper already, and we have a lot of help. We very luckily, so like I'm doing good. But thank you.
Oh my gosh. Okay, now I just want to ask you all things like your birth story and all that, but maybe it'll come up organically.
Everything's been great. She's been a pretty easy baby, but life looks a little differently now for my husband and I than it did pre-baby. But we spend a lot of time cooking together. We both love to cook, which is really nice, especially right now where, we don't have as much time and one of us doesn't feel like being the other one loves to do it. So, we have a glass of wine together and cook together when we can. And in the summer, we garden. Can't do that a lot in Michigan, but that's a passion of ours too. So a lot of our activities involve food, which is like kind of lame, but at the same time, kind of cool because now I get to do that, during my day when I'm working is a lot of my job is involved around food too. But I'm a dietitian. So I've been a dietitian for almost 10 years. A lot of my experience has been in children's hospitals, working through just different inpatient and outpatient clinics. But before I started my business, Blended Tube Feeding, I was working mostly in a neurodevelopment clinic. And this was following, the higher risk NICU babies with rare conditions, brain injuries. And it was really my experience there and the families that I worked with that heavily influenced me to start Blended Tube Feeding. There's a lot of people pushing back on the way we did things and honestly made me question a lot of what I've been taught. And yeah, that kind of snowballed into what I'm doing now. But I'm so thankful for them and those experiences because honestly, I can't imagine doing anything else. And like I said, I get to do a lot with food during my day, which I love.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so grateful for experts like you that not only work in the hospital and have the experience, but have gone to other outpatient settings and then found a big gap and a gap that you can help fill for families. And So you mentioned your business, blended tube feeding, and then you come with this dietitian background. And I also love that you practice what you preach and that you garden. You and your husband love cooking. It's kind of like you've centered your whole life around food, and now you're using what you've learned to help others. Do you have like an aha moment? Maybe it was working with a patient or a family that you could share, or did you just find yourself creating these recipes and teaching families how to do it? How did you come up with creating blended tube feeding?
Yeah, I mean, it's like when I look back, I wouldn't have pictured this for myself and what I would end up doing, but it all sort of makes sense that my path led me to this point, which is really cool. But, in this clinic I was working in, it was a huge clinic with a ton of kids, a lot of kids who had feeding tube, and they all were struggling with digestive issues. And I felt like we were just band-aiding the problem a lot, giving them another medication to try or switching their formula or slowing down their feeds. And I had quite a few parents that would push back on this and say, this isn't really working for us. I mean, yes, it's keeping their reflux under control, but making life so much harder for me at home. And I have to keep doing these things that you're telling me to keep the reflux under control. And as parents do, and where I think we find the best information is in these different community groups. And so they were going to these other parents and asking what's working for them. And real food was something that these families were doing and trying and making a big difference. And it wasn't something that so strange. It's something I hadn't heard of before as a dietitian with tube feeding, which you would think that as dietitians, we would be like all about food, but you kind of get down this path of tube feeding and are told it's not something that's possible. So anyway, I just had some families that were asking me about this and trying things on their own. And it was pretty amazing how quickly, these kids who had been struggling for years, they had tried everything, every procedure, every test, were told that their child just is going to continue to vomit. It's just their medical condition or just because they have a feeding tube. They would do a little real food and they were just doing so much better. Their puking was under control. They're getting off medications. And I think that was kind of my aha moment is when we started to have more families ask about this and sort of just kind of do it because they were sick of what we were offering them. These kids that we thought were just chronically going to struggle with digestive issues were doing complete 180. And then, I think the coolest part was these parents were telling me like, I I didn't realize how much I was missing this. I love getting to go grocery shopping and cook for my child. And I feel like things that are so out of my control, I'm kind of getting a little bit of that control back. And I was like, this is amazing. I love to cook. And if I had a kid with a feeding tube, I would love to do this. And I think it just kind of hit me like, why are we not helping more families with this? Why are we not taught to do this when I'm seeing over and over and over again how much better these kids are doing and how much more fun I would say the families were having with it?
Wow. One of the ways I love that you approach families is what we talked about at the beginning, and that's that there's no one right way to do anything. It's the right way for you and your child. And so I think you and I both having worked in the hospital and seeing a lot of different things is like some things will work for some kids and some won't. And sometimes the reason something won't work is because you don't have time, you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the mental energy, you don't have the resources to do something like blended tube feeding. But your approach is so much that this may not be for you. Maybe it will be for you and your child later. Maybe you'll use what I'm teaching you now in another aspect of your life, and that there's no judgment regardless. And so I probably took the words out of your mouth, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's so true. I think that's such a delicate balance because in no way am I anti-formula or I mean, I would say most families I work with are still using formula. So it's not that it has to be this, all or nothing approach and what works for you and your child works for you and your child. You know your child best. And so I don't think anybody should ever feel bad for whatever choices that they're making. I just wish that more knew this was an option and had those resources to do this and make it easier for them when you only have so much bandwidth to do things. And so if it's something that you really want to try, but you don't have the resources to do it, it's frustrating and it's defeating because that's just the way our system is kind of set up is not to really help families with this.
I know it's just it's mind-boggling, but very, very accurate that you're not set up for success in this area in a lot of different ways of caring for your child with medical needs. So talk us through like what your, I'd say, quote unquote, typical patient or family looks like that you work with and how you walk them through the process of going through blended tube feeding.
There's so many ways to do this. I think it really depends on the child. You know, some will feel more comfortable just making a plate like they do the rest of the family and throwing that in the blender and getting that to liquid form and giving that for a meal. That's not the typical family I work with who tend to, these kids have been tube fed most of their life. Maybe they've had no real food before. Maybe they're struggling with a lot of digestive issues or growth is a concern. And so going from a very regimented formula plan to just, throwing things in the blender and hoping for the best is really intimidating. So families I work with, we take it pretty slow. A lot of them haven't had food before, and families don't want to just start with 8 different foods blended together and, worried that might be causing some kind of, or might cause an allergy or something like that. So we take things really slow, and it can be as slow as starting with single food puree and even using store-bought puree, because maybe you don't want to get a blender yet. You just want to see how your child does with this. And going to the store and buying like a sweet potato puree and mixing a little bit of that with formula or breast milk is a really good first step for you and your child. It's not as intimidating. And then you can start to build a bank of foods that you feel like, okay, I've given this to my child. I've put that through their feeding tube. Now, if I mix it together, I'm not as worried that something is going to happen. And so, that's kind of our first step is, do you want to just start with single foods and walking them through how to do that? And then maybe we'll start mixing together a few of those foods, things that are easily digested, like sweet potatoes and avocado and banana. And, right now, most of their plan is still formula. So I know we get so focused on nutrition, and that's the clinician's fault of like ingraining, you have to follow these perfect nutrition plans. So it can be a little intimidating to not know exactly the exact calories for the day. But I like to encourage families, like, let's just look at this one meal, leave everything else the same, and mix a few foods together. Maybe not worry so much about the nutrition of that meal. We're just testing things out right now to see how your child is doing. And then, maybe we replace another meal from there. And so just take it as slow as you need to, because again, when you're on this plan and maybe you just got things to be manageable, you don't really want to rock the boat, right? And like do this complete overhaul. That's
Yeah.
intimidating.
I was
Yeah.
just about to say, I can imagine the fear and questions are like, what if things get worse because of this? And I can't imagine things getting any harder. Do families
Right.
share that with you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say most families feel that way because maybe their plan, I say plan, like their tube feeding plan is not optimal and their child's still struggling, but it's the best that it's done. And they finally found a routine that's working for them. And maybe it's still hard, but it can't get any harder because they're like trying to juggle a million things at once. So I think just starting that slow gives them confidence and doesn't rock the boat too much.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't have very many kids at all that don't that it does get harder or that it is worse. But when you've tried a million things and nothing has worked, then that's obviously a very obvious fear that could come
Yeah.
up. But that's kind of how we take things slow. I have families that really need to pay attention to calories. So the way we set our recipes up have different calorie levels. So if they have a formula that's 1 calorie per ml, they can use recipes that are 1 calorie per ml. So they can just swap, keep the meal size the same, just swap formula for food and then not have to stress about the calories because your providers keeping track of that growth chart. And every time you go into a visit, you're feeling bad about growth. And we just don't want to add that extra layer of stress through this transition.
I mean, you probably have a lot of speculation on this. Why aren't dietitians taught this strategy in school?
I think our medical system is pretty influenced by like big food, big pharma, and I don't know if that plays a role into that. The cool thing a lot of people don't realize is that before we had formula, we just used food. Hospitals actually blended food and gave that through a feeding tube. And so I shouldn't say it's all because of big food and big pharma. I think part of it was also companies came out with these formulas that thought to be safer, easier for hospitals to handle. And then that just kind of became the norm. And it was just easier all around to use formula. And maybe they didn't realize the digestive issues were going to happen or that it would be disconnecting for families. But that kind of became the norm. And then that's just what we're taught. It's not researched a lot either. And, clinicians are very evidence based. And that might be something too, is we just don't have a ton of guidelines for this. And so that really leads education as well. But it is changing. I mean, I have dietetic students with me who tell me that they have these labs that are all about blended tube feeding and they're learning more about this in school. So I'm hopeful that it's starting to change. But as we know,
Yeah.
things are and very slow.
Yes, and I wanna bookmark that. I would love any research or evidence you have on the topic that we can share on the episode too, for medical parents are just such amazing advocates and know their stuff, and love to
Mhm.
be like, "When I go to the doctor and I talk to them about this, I wanna tell them why A, B, and C." So that would be amazing to have. Do you work one-on-one virtually with families? Is that mostly how your setup is?
A little bit of that, but also we have an online community group. So I found that working with families is great, but we learn a lot from each other, and parents that are doing this every day and trying different things are just as good of resources as I am. And so I also wanted to create a space where people were going through something together and felt comfortable asking questions and just connecting with other parents who were on the same path and learning this. So we have a community group online. It's off Facebook. It's just a space you can get through an app or on a browser, but people can connect in there, and it has our full program. So if you don't necessarily feel like you need that one-on-one support with me, you can just join this group and get the step-by-step instructions on how to start with single foods and then what kind of equipment do you need. And as you're going through that, you can ask families questions in this space too. So it's a really, non-judgmental space and super supportive. So that's the main way I actually help people now, is just in this community group. They can go through the resources and ask questions there. But if they feel like they need a little extra help, or maybe just want someone to tell them exactly like what to do for their child, then I do work with people one-on-one if they need that.
Is any of it reimbursable by insurance or maybe your one-on-one consultations?
Right now, I can take an FSA and HSA, but it's not something I have found can get covered by insurance.
Yeah.
There's so many insurance hoops, but we do take FSA and HSA.
Okay, that's great. You're speaking the child life language there with like because we're not a billable service in the hospital, it's another big discussion for us. And these are such valuable tools and resources when we look at the
Yeah.
whole healing of a child and family. But that's
Right,
just
right.
helpful to know up front.
In the community group, it's just subscription. So it's really low commitment. It's month to month. Everything's downloadable. So it's $37 to join. You get support for that whole month, get all the resources you need. You can stay continued months if you like to have the community space and, continued access to me for questions, but you can also be done after 1 month. So it's a lot more accessible that way too. And it's, I think, just as good as working with me one-on-one, because it's basically what I do one-on-one, but in videos that you can access on demand.
Yeah. Well, you came recommended by someone who works for Child Life on Call, who just loves reading your stuff, learning so much from you. Your information is getting shared. And I'm just grateful that you took what you learned and you questioned it and you said, how can we make it better and easier for families? Because ultimately, like, just the idea that you were kind of painting that picture of, like, being able to be in the kitchen and do something that, quote, unquote, "feels normal," or something that maybe you had grieved you wouldn't be able to do before, but now you no longer have to grieve, you can bring it into your life.
Yeah, definitely.
I know you're just 7 weeks in to motherhood, although, being pregnant, of course, you have that mother connection. Have you learned anything about yourself now that you're a parent that may impact the way you work with families?
Oh, that's a good question. I find myself to be a pretty empathetic person and somebody who is a very curious person, like pays attention to how people are feeling, but you still don't get it until you're actually in that situation. And I know I'm still not even close to being in the situation of having a child who has a lot going on medically, but there's still around the clock demand with a newborn. And, we had a couple of rough weeks, and it's rough weeks. So I think it just puts things even more into perspective for me, how it's hard for me to get stuff done in the day. And I have a fraction of the demand that I know a lot of the families that I work with have. And so just even more makes me want to continue to change my resources and make this as easy as possible for families that want to do this and in the way that they want it to be done. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, is just continuing to shift my perspective and, the way I support family to make this easier for them, because I know that life is not easy a lot of the time.
Oh, I love that. I'm like such a like, I'm lessening my dose of depression and anxiety, so I'm, like, more willing to cry, although I do cry a lot on the
Yeah.
podcast, but it's something about, like, for me, when I became a parent, and it sounds like you too, just, like, this gratitude and just in awe of families who have so much responsibility when it comes to maintaining their child's health. and
Mhm.
that those of us who have the bandwidth to create these resources to make it easier on those families is such a gift to be able to
Mhm.
do because we have that bandwidth. And so, so grateful for people like you.
Yeah, same to you.
Tell me one of the success stories from someone in your community that you like to share.
Yeah, I have a lot. I think the biggest ones that stand out are, again, where they tell me stories of how it kind of normalized things for them. So, a story that I think I share often is a parent who their child was 3 when I was working with him. His 2 feeds took over 2 hours to give, 4 or 5 times a day to do that, plus overnight feeds. So really around the clock, they were doing tube feeds, had to keep him upright so that he wouldn't vomit, couldn't really leave the house, couldn't get in the car because that would make things worse. And so the last 3 years for them had been just a complete 180 from the life that they had before. And it was just also just really hard to see your child struggle like that. And we worked together. We did mostly blended food, but we also did formula, which again, something that we could talk about too is there's a lot of commercial products available that are where the companies blend the food for you and it's self-stable and that can be an option too, so you don't have to do any blending yourself.
Oh,
But
wow.
what they were doing was a mixture of making food for him and then also using these real food commercial products. And she told me they had gone out to do some errands, picked up some panera bread on the way back, and they realized, wow, we could just pick him up some food too and blend it when we get home. And I think that was just such a cool and this is kind of the beginning of me doing this too, where it was something so normal, but they hadn't got to do that. They hadn't been able to share a meal like that together or like give him like food like that, where it's just like something that they had thought their life would look like. And now they're getting to do that. Again, it's just my perspective because it's something so simple that I take for granted. And they were so wowed by that it was just like, this is so cool to be able to give this back to families and
Mm,
help them normalize things in small ways.
yeah. And to have somebody so trusted with such experience in so many different settings and having worked with families. And I think the icing on the cake, which is kind of like a bunch, right? Because we're talking about two, is that these families are talking with each other too and giving strategies. And it's like, you're not going through this alone. And I think
Mhm.
that's a common theme I hear is I don't like you want to know somebody else who's done it and it's worked.
Yeah.
And you can do that in your community. How can families find you? What's the best way if they're not ready to invest in the community, but just want to learn from some of your resources? How can they do that?
So I'm pretty much blended tube feeding anywhere you find me. So Instagram at blended tube feeding. I share a lot of recipes on there, different resources. I also have a website where I do more like long form articles answering more questions and more in depth, like how do you manage fluids? And if you want to get started, here's my 5 steps for getting started. So a lot of free resources on my website and Instagram. So website is blendedtubefeeding.com. So I'm hanging out there. You're welcome to email me if you have questions or send me a message on Instagram. I'm happy to answer questions there too. So you don't have to be in a community group if you aren't ready to, take that step yet.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for what you do and what you offer families. And I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast today. As a parent, you want to be there for your child, especially when it comes to their health. But healthcare can be overwhelming and confusing. The good news is child life specialists are experts who help families navigate these challenges. But often our support is only in hospitals. So imagine if you had access to these valuable tools and resources all the time. You would be able to understand medical procedures, explain them to your child, and help them feel less anxious, which also makes you probably feel less anxious. So, when your child visits the doctor, has surgery, or has a medical procedure, having the right information and support can make all the difference. You, the parent, can be prepared to answer their questions, calm their fears, and advocate for their needs. Child Life Specialist tools are ready to be in your hands right now through our app Support Spot. All you have to do is go to the iOS or Android store, type in Support Spot. We are giving all of our listeners on this podcast access to the app for just $19.99 for an entire year. You are going to have, I'm not kidding, 7 years worth of resources and support and information that we have been building at Child Life on Call at your fingertips. With these tools in your pocket, you can transform the way your family experiences medical care. Parents, you deserve to be informed and feel confident in your child's healthcare journey.
And by having access to Support Spot, you can ensure that your child feels supported and understood no matter what medical challenges come your way. Head to the link in the show notes or go to your app store, type in Support Spot to download it today. For those of you who are joining us today, I am not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I am a child life specialist. And the suggestions and tips and resources that I talk about with parents on this podcast may be great for you and they may not be right for you. So the most important person you can talk to about getting support is your care team, your doctor who knows your story and your child's story. So regardless of maybe what I mention or what other families mention here, we're not licensed therapists, we're not doctors. We're having a conversation about what the parenting journey has been like. So please keep that in mind as you listen today.